Chapter 30. Chapter 30 is a chapter that they say is kind of like chapter 32, which is also in 2 chapters from now. Kind of fits, but it seems like added afterwards, or it seems like it's not fully within the flow of things. But maybe because I just accept this Tanya, I can kind of see where it comes in here. Because I can see where it doesn't come in when talking about depression, things that weigh us down, sadness that immobilizes us. Chapter 30, which the subject is mainly humility, but the other kind of humility, I can see why that wouldn't be good for that kind of discussion. But we shifted to talk about what about when someone feels what we call timtum alev, which is dullness of the heart, kind of like apathy. And we said, well, the thing you have to do is you have to break yourself. You have to break your ego, your sense of self. The reason why things are not penetrating is because you've got a clot there and you got to break through it. And it's a harsh way of dealing with things, but it's a really urgent situation what this person is in right now. We need you to feel. That's what prompts you and gets you going and keeps you going. The last chapter is all about how we have to break ourselves and all that kind of stuff. This chapter focuses on humility, which I see where it fits in, and I also see how it could be a leader for Avos Yisrael. What this chapter focuses on is not necessarily something that we see a lot in Tanya as a general idea. We do talk about bittul a lot, but this is specifically talking about shiftless. It's not just humility, it's a feeling of lowliness. The chapter starts off, says, V'ados yasem aliba l'kayim mamar hazal v'veshva ruach b'fnei kol adam. On top of all this, a person should take to heart that they should be, as Razal say, the sages they say, be lowly of spirit before every man. So the emphasis here is that shafal ruach, that we translate be lowly of spirit, we kind of translate as humility, but that's kind of a loose translation. Because in reality, there's 2 kinds of humility. There's a feeling of inferiority before others. It's a feeling of lowliness as compared to others, which is shiftless. Shafal ruach is shiftless, versus the absence of self-glorification, even while recognizing one's superiority, which is what a nivus is. That is what we talk about when Moshe haya anav mikol adam. Talk about Moshe's level of humility. That second level is what Moshe Rabbeinu had. Ideally, it's a good level of humility to have in saying, I know that I'm good at X, but I also know I'm not good at X because I'm so great. I'm good at X because God needs me to be good at X for whatever my purpose in this world is. So I don't get any credit for it, but I'm not going to make light of the fact. I'm not just going to deny the fact that I do have certain talents and certain strengths, etc. Anivas is, I don't need to be a leader. I don't want to be a leader, but I know that I'm the most qualified leader right now. I have the leadership ability, so I'm going to take charge of this kind of thing. We understand what Nivus is. We know Moshe Rabbeinu, we know the great level he was at. It's saying, I know I'm good at stuff. Imagine if someone better than me had been given this stuff. Imagine what they could accomplish. So it's humility, but it's without the feeling of lowliness that shiftless implies. So what's shiftless? Shiftless is a feeling of inferiority next to somebody else. It's a little bit more of feeling like a bug next to other people. And Nivus, you're a human being and God's creation. Shiftless, you make yourself feel so much smaller before other people. And the Alter Rebbe emphasizes that even before Kal Shabakalim, which Kal Shabakalim is a term that's used for somebody who's totally ignorant and totally does not seem to be doing anything they're supposed to be doing in line with Judaism, even before something like that. Well, how's that supposed to happen? Such a good question. Well, how are we supposed to be there? If you're telling me that this level of humility is so important, especially in the breaking of the ego and the breaking of the self, kind of going for drastic measures here, Anivus is not enough here. We need shiftless. Why would I feel lowly before someone who I know, and we all know, is not doing what they're supposed to be doing? Not in a made-up kind of way. I could see that person skipped 40 pages in davening. The only thing they say is Shema, and I say the whole davening. Why am I supposed to feel smaller compared to them? That's what shiftless is going to do. That, yeah, the person only said Shema and you said the whole davening, but you have no place to feel superior to them, and not just that, you should feel inferior to them. So how do we get there? Because it's continuing this idea of the breaking of the ego situation. So we start in 29, talking about how do you break through dullness of the heart, timtum alev. A log doesn't catch on fire by itself, but if you break the log into smaller pieces, it will catch fire. So what we have to do is we have to break our self, our sense of self, the material self, we have to break it. And you have to rage at the dark side, basically. No, we're not worried about self-esteem right now, because that's not what this formula right now of the breaking of the self doesn't call for self-esteem. We're not trying to get a person to this permanent state of this is how you're supposed to walk around all the time. What we're trying to do is we have to get to an initial state of breaking through the ego. And we do that with shiftless. Because having self-esteem, which, by the way, you should listen to Matt Walsh's thing about self-esteem that he did for PragerU, makes you question whether or not you should use the term anymore, because esteem is a high regard. So self-esteem means I have a high regard for self. It's an arrogant term, basically. But the point is, self-esteem is not an issue here. We're not worried right now about what your feelings are in this moment. Well, we are, but not in that kind of regard. What we're trying to do is break through the clot that has been created through your chasing of the material life. And that clot blocks you from feeling spirituality. You claim you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. So believing that you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, why are you not feeling things? So the last chapter talked about raging against things. You got to have a real honest conversation with yourself. You have to splinter the log of yourself, is basically what it is. Because if you want to light a bonfire, you don't just toss a whole log in there. You have to break it up into smaller pieces, and that will catch fire. So we have to break up our material self. And we did that with raging, this metaphorical raging, even a literal kind of raging against ourselves. Now we're looking at another method of trying to break through ourselves. self. We're trying to break through our own egos. We're trying to break through our own grounding that we've had in this physical world, that we're so grounded, spirituality is not getting through. Other things are not coming into play here right now. We will rebuild ourselves. We're crouching in order to jump. We got to crouch first. So how do we lower ourselves first? We're going to lower ourselves through shiftless. And especially because a first protest that someone might have is, you compare me to tzaddik, of course I'm lower than they are. You know, the whole beginning of Tanya told me, don't even try to be a tzaddik, you're not there. You just try to get to the Beinoni level even. So if you tell me, oh, before great tzaddikim, feel small, like, yeah, I could do that. But the Alter Rebbe is saying it's not just next to that tzaddik that you're supposed to feel smaller and you're supposed to feel lesser. Or not even amongst your own peers or family members. Oh, this person is so talented in music and I'm not. Wow, so much respect for you. That's not shiftless. I'm still pretty grounded in myself and I can acknowledge your talent. I acknowledge my own talent to be grounded in myself. So I can have a nivus, but that's not shiftless. I didn't break through myself. I'm trying to break through the self. I have to remind myself that I'm inferior to what my actual capacity is. That's kind of the one-liner of it. I am smaller than what I can really be. But we're doing that through shiftless by comparing myself to somebody else, which usually we don't want to see that. But the emphasis is not on the other person, the emphasis is on the self. So the comparison is happening, but it's not to focus on what the other person is about, but on ourselves. So how do we do that? Especially someone who seems to be lesser than I am on the spiritual religious scale. How can I feel inferior to them? So that's what we have here, familiar verse of Ata dines chaverch, ad shetegilam. Don't judge a fellow man until you have stood in his place. What we usually say is until you've actually placed himself in his place. Don't judge somebody else until you've walked a mile in their shoes, because then you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. But it's not just that. It's because until you've actually lived their life, that's usually the way we explain it. That unless you've actually lived in their body or have their upbringing and know what their financial state is and emotional state is, you can't judge somebody else. That's what you've learned until now, and that's all good and that's all true. But again, we're bringing the shiftless here. How do we do that? The Alter Rebbe tells us, Ki b'kama garm lo lachto. For it is literally his place, as in his physical environment, that causes him to sin. Because ayin rov alev chomet. With the eye see, the heart desires. The Alter Rebbe is saying, you're looking at that other person, you're saying, oh, look at that bum. That person who's lower on the religious scale. Have you actually been in his place? You're in your little ivory tower of religiosity. You grew up in your life where everything, you had your great moral code that you grew up with, or whatever it is, and you think you're so superior, but you have never actually lived his day-to-day life. You have to go on into the marketplace with him, which, okay, we don't go into the marketplace so much anymore. Are you always bombarded with and surrounded by the same temptations and desires that he is? So how can you know what he's fighting against and what he's resisted? You have not put yourself in his place in that regard. So this is step number one. You can imagine in those days, someone used to go to the markets, they go to the fair, they would be bombarded with everything. Who knows what they had going on in these places? That person got bombarded with that every day, and you stayed in your little shtetl. You're going to tell me that you're superior to that person? You have no idea what that person has to resist. And even if they did end up eating pig or whatever it was, do you know what kind of struggle that person went through? You don't know what struggle that person went through. Maybe he went every single day for 5 weeks smelling that pig before he took a piece of it. Would you go every day for 5 weeks without having a piece of it? So don't pretend like you're so superior to somebody else. You have not actually walked in his shoes in that regard. You have not been in his place. You don't deal what he deals with. Now, aside from the assertion that we have, this groundbreaking assertion that the two souls and they're fighting and they're struggling within us, the first bombshell Tanya dropped on us. Now here's the next bombshell from Tanya. You know, we've probably had a lot in between. The evil impulse is not the same in everyone. When you think about it for 5 minutes, you realize that it's kind of true. We know it's true with other things. Why is it so hard for you to not do this? It's so easy to not do this. Some people that exist somewhere, chocolate does not speak to them. So you say, oh, we're going to go on a diet. You can't eat chocolate anymore. They're like, whatever. Some people are like, okay, no more chips today. They don't care about chips, so fine, whatever. Other people are like, no more chips today, and that's going to be a real struggle for them. So not only is it that you've never walked around in his shoes, you didn't live his life in that regard, and you don't deal with the day-to-day temptation and desires that he deals with, but your Yetzer Hara and his Yetzer Hara are not the same Yetzer Hara. There's not a blanket Yetzer Hara that everybody fights. There's a Yetzer Hara that's tailored for him, there's a Yetzer Hara that's for you. Which, Parshas Bereshis, when you learn the commentaries about the whole thing that went down with the Yetzer Das, and especially the ones who say that this is all Friday afternoon, that it was 3 hours that Adam and Chava had to wait not to eat from the tree, and after the first hour, they already sinned. And we always see the story, and that is the ultimate, the sin that occurred. But when you really think about it, you're like, what's so hard about not eating from a tree? There was like a bazillion other trees there, and that was the only tree you had to eat from, was the tree that Yetzer Das. Go find another tree to eat from. Go find other figs or whatever fruit it was. Really? Really? Well, yeah, really. It was so important for Adam and Chava not to eat from it. You could imagine the forces that were working against. I mean, there was a walking, talking snake that came against them. That's what they were contending with. Right? If you know the story, I don't remember which sages it happened with. They were discussing the times of King Menashe and his contemporaries, how they were running after idolatry, and they kind kind of spoke about it in like a little bit of a derogatory sense. And one of the sages that night, he had a dream that King Menashe came to him. King Menashe is the son of Chizkiah. King Menashe came to him and he said, if you had lived during our time, you would have lifted the hem of your robe to go run after idolatry. I think it's in the Talmud. It says that after a certain time, the pull for idolatry, the temptation for idolatry was taken away. It's actually replaced with the pull of money. We know that a lot of people do a lot of crazy stuff for money. So we're like, you're bow down to an idol? Like, seriously, people, you're way smarter than that. But we have no clue what their Yetzirah for idolatry was. Because thank God, God took it away from us. Even the stuff that we face today, some people then or in the future would be like, that's what you guys are running after? Really? So until you've actually lived in that person's time, in that place, and you've actually been surrounded by their temptations and desires, you don't know how you would react to it. So how can you judge somebody else against what they react to? It always reminds me that we know someone that, whenever you see her, she's so smiley. My older sister once told me something. She like suffers from depression. What? I don't think I've ever not seen her smiling. And she's like, no, you don't know the battle she goes through every morning just to get out of bed. The point is we have no clue. So we already have that, which we have no clue where someone's neshama comes from and what their capacities are and all that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about, oh, you think you're doing okay? Are you really doing okay? Because what? Because you're better off than Bob? Well, you don't know what Bob goes through. For all you know, Bob has a greater soul than you. Bob, he might fail, but he puts up a better fight than you've ever put up. Even for Bob, who seems to be a total bum, you should be feeling inferior toward him because you don't know. You don't know what he's faced with. You know what he deals with on a day-to-day basis. You don't know. So if we could have that thought. Therefore, every man ought to weigh and examine his own position according to the standards of his place and rank in divine service as to whether he serves God in a situation requiring a comparable struggle in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test as this. Can you honestly say that if you would be in the same place, being Bob, would you do better than Bob is doing right now? And then think for your own standard, which is what we come to next. The next level that we get to of breaking it down, of saying, can I honestly say that I have actually put in enough of a struggle, either Surmera or Aseh Tov? Have I actually done for either one of those? You say, okay, Bob struggles with eating pork or whatever it is. So, I would never eat pork. Okay, and everybody has a different answer, so fine. Pork doesn't talk to me. I don't really like meat. I don't like this, that, whatever. Fine. So I understand why I shouldn't look down on Bob now. But now we're still talking about feeling inferior to him. Let's say Bob struggles so much, whether he succeeds or not, whatever it is. Can you honestly look at yourself in the mirror and say that either between Sur Meirah, something they shouldn't have done, I'm not talking about the size of an Aveira or the size of a Mitzvah, that we've gone through already. At the moment of an Aveira, no matter how quote unquote big or small it is, there's a separation that occurs. And doing the Mitzvah at that moment is a moment of eternity that we've put into place. So can I honestly say that Sur Meirah, Aseh Tov, can I also say that I've broken a sweat in either one of those? Have I actually exerted myself in any one of those of late? To say that, no, I understand the struggle. I understand what it means to struggle. Can you actually go through and look through all your actions and say, I've broken a sweat in any one of these things? The Torah breaks it down with everything. Can you say that you've had proper kavanah in davening? For every single davening that you've done, for every bracha that you say. As far down as we have to break this down to prove that you're not on par as you think you are. To prove that you have not put in as much of a struggle as you should have. On your level, for your standard. Remember we talked about that there was a vertical truth and there's a horizontal truth. Is avodah of a beinoni, is it still a correct avodah if it's not the level of a tzaddik? Well, for the beinoni, it's truth. But your horizontal truth is, can you say that you actually have measured up according to what your capacities are and what your level is? Kavanah, you're giving tzedakah. Do you always just write out the $18 check, or have you ever, all right, let's do a $180 check? Or more than that. You should all give way more than that, $180,000. Can you say that with everything? Studying Torah, or someone gossips about someone. Have you walked away from a middle of good gossip? You shut it down or anything like that? Could you say that you've never been frivolous with your time or anything like that? The Alter Rebbe breaks down every single option to show that when we start looking closely enough, we start delving in, we realize that no, maybe perhaps I have not. I can't truly say that I've broken a sweat in any of these regards. Umali b'chinas, sur meirah, mali b'chinas v'aseh tov, hakol hi mitzvah melcha kadosh, yachad miuchad baruch hu. What difference is there between the category of turn away from evil, and this one it says in which the Kal Shabbat fails by active violation, and the category of do good, in which he fails by neglecting to exert himself in prayer, Torah study, and the like. Both are the commandments of the Holy King, the only unique one, blessed be he. Basically, you're going to look down on the Kal Shabbat on this bum, we'll just paraphrase, because, oh, he transgressed, he did this affair, he's not keeping Shabbos the way he should, he doesn't daven the way he should, whatever. So maybe you don't transgress. But can you say that you have put in equal amount according to what your capacities are? You put in equal amount of effort. Have you broken a sweat when it comes to Aseh Tov and doing what you're supposed to do? In davening and Torah study and tzedakah and all that kind of stuff. Can you honestly say that you've done that? When we talk about you should have shiftless in comparison and feeling inferior to somebody else, this is what we're meaning by that. We're basically reminding ourselves that we're not truly actually measuring up to what we're supposed to be. And we're using someone that we think that we feel superior to and reminding ourselves that we have no idea what they're going through, but imagine imagining what kind of fight or battle, whatever they're having, can we say, have I even put in a battle? Have I even struggled with any of these things? Or do I just kind of let it go? Oh, well, I missed the chance to do a mitzvah. The altar of ads in here, also with sanctifying yourself with what is permitted, that I haven't indulged in anything, even stuff that's not specifically surmer or asetov. Can you honestly say that everything that you're eating and everything that you're doing is really because God says V'yisem Kedoshim, that you should be holy? Kedusha, by the way, doesn't mean holiness, really means to set ourselves apart. So, using all this, that's what this chapter focuses on, this chapter of Shiflus. Not just a Nivus that says, oh, I'm so humble, I don't get credit for the great things that I've done. It's feeling inferior to somebody else, even someone who seems to be a lowly person, in remembering and in knowing that we don't know the struggles and tests that they go through, but looking at ourselves honestly to say, have I actually really struggled? Have I actually really tried to engage in this test or to overcome this test in all the things that I do actually do, or in the right things that I do? Through that's how we make ourselves feel lowly, to say, you know what, I'm honestly not measuring up. Sidebar, obviously, so then get your act together and start to measure up. The general idea is getting ourselves to this place of admitting that I'm not doing as much as I really could be doing. That's part of how we're going to break through ourself, material self, and break through the ego.